The Center for Teaching and Learning is proud to host this workshop with Kristen, Walton, and Aaron Grant, who are going to be talking to us about the pedagogy of teaching. That was the title they graciously gave us back in February. We're curious to know, is that what you're presenting today? And if so, show us how. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you.
Okay. Aaron, do you want to go first, or do you want to?
I'm going to have you go first for 2 seconds, only because I need to pull up my notes.
Okay.
Okay, never mind, I got it. So go.
This is good pedagogy.
Yeah.
Well, because I have a tendency to ramble, I did put together a couple of slides just to remind myself of a few things to say. So we thought we would start by introducing ourselves. We have really different backgrounds and really different training, I think, in the scholarship of teaching. It's not my area. That's kind of what my slides are about, where it is Aaron's area. I'll just start with a little bit about who I am and my background, and then I'll turn it over to Aaron to do the same, and then we can definitely make this more of a discussion than a presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right, fancy title slide, always a good thing for teaching. So the scholarship of teaching is something that has a lot of different names, and I'm guessing most of you that are here are familiar with these, but in my discipline, which is biology and biomedical sciences, there's a lot of names for this. Some people will call it pedagogical research. SoTL was a thing when I was a postdoc, grad student postdoc, everybody. This was the new acronym and buzzword. People are saying Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And now what I see more is DBER. I guess that's easier to say than SoTL. I don't know. That's discipline-based education research. And in my specific field, I see BER, biology education research. So everybody loves a good acronym. There's a lot of ways to frame this. It just means that you're using evidence-based practices for your teaching, and also that you are hopefully contributing to that body of evidence if you're doing the research. In my field, there are a lot of people who are like me who are doing SoTL, DBER, BER, that's not a good acronym, who really weren't trained in this. So not formally or extensively trained in qualitative data analysis, which is something that is more prevalent in social sciences research, or in the correct types of statistics for survey data and so on. So just as an example, this is who I am, or my path anyway. So my bachelor's degree is in biology, really standard undergraduate biology degree. It says, please move this window away from the shared screen. I don't know why. My PhD is in physiology. And you don't need to read my dissertation title. I'll just point out that's not education research. It was bench research using animal models in physiology. Then I did a postdoc, which was unusual in my area. So my PhD was from a department within a medical school, and teaching was not required at all. Those of us who were interested in a career pathway involving teaching had the opportunity to TA for, like, I was a TA for a medical student first year physiology course and things like that, but there wasn't any formal TA program. There was no training. It was all stuff that we would seek out if we wanted to. But as it happened, at the same place where I did my PhD, there was a brand new postdoc program, brand new at the time. I was in the second cohort, called the SPIRE program, which was intended for people who wanted to teach and continue with a research postdoc. So we did 2 years of sort of typical bench work type postdoc research. And mine was not in education research. It was in immunology and microbial stuff, not education research. But we also got to do a year of teaching. Our partner schools, our partner undergraduate institutions were historically minority institutions in North Carolina, and we were the instructor of record. So I got the opportunity to teach with a mentor to help with that. And the postdoc fellowship also gave us some, my first introduction into what we're now calling evidence-based teaching. It used to, that's sort of the trend in my field to use that terminology versus active learning and things like that, which are some other examples. And so what I've done since I've been at Missouri Western, most of these are some projects that I have worked on. A lot of my educational research, biology education research that has been published has been about things that I do in my classes that I have, in some cases, pretty minimal assessment of, and I'm publishing them as sort of a tips and tools type publication, which is still peer reviewed. It still counts, you know, and all the things were assessed on. In other cases, this one was with a collaborator at North Carolina. We were coming up with an instrument, a tool to analyze some types of data analysis skills that our students had. So those are the kinds of things that I have done over the years, and the projects that I continue to do are along those lines. It's really about doing the things that I'm interested in my classes and trying new things and trying to assess those. That's where you go from using the evidence-based teaching to turning it into your own scholarly work, is treating it as a research project and having assessment if possible and finding a venue for a publication for that. So I showed you that stuff mostly because I wanted to make the point that I know across campus, some people are way better than I am at doing education research. I wasn't trained in it, but I'm still doing it. Over the years, I've been to workshops and lots of talks, read lots of papers, and am able to still do some degree of education research, even though that's not my training as a grad student and postdoc. So I'll stop with my spiel there and turn it over to Aaron, because again, I know his path is really different than mine.
Different and not that different. Most different in that I didn't make a cool slideshow, because if I don't have to touch PowerPoint, because I'm OCD, and if I don't have to touch PowerPoints, then it means that I don't have 2 weeks worth of work to do. But I would say that my path to doing teaching scholarship is a little bit different, but my approach to scholarship is very similar. So a little bit of background about me. I'm a music theory professor. Music theory is an odd field in that most of us, we get a lot of training typically in teaching during grad school. So I've been teaching in a classroom environment since my master's. So I think I've only been here 3 years, but I think I have 13 or 14 years of teaching experience. I can't do math. I just said I could, now I can't. But anyway, I taught every year during my graduate studies, and got extensive training both from mentorship from my graduate colleagues, but also we are required during our doctorates to take 1 or even 2 classes on music theory pedagogy. I'm also in an odd position in that my graduate work was done at the Eastman School of Music, where it's even more teaching heavy than most people in my field, and also there were 2 people who were there were 3 of my superiors or mentors were either wrote textbooks. So 2 of the main 3 textbooks in my field were written by my mentors, or their primary form of research was music theory pedagogy. So this is something that I've been in for a while, and I can't say that I ever got extensive training in how to do pedagogical research, but I would say that I've been engaged with pedagogical research and people doing this sort of research for a very long time. It's also very common in my field for people to be reading, we have the Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy. We have an open access journal called Engaging Students. Actually, both of them are now open access. They used to not be. And everyone reads all of these articles. Like I published an article in one of those journals that came out, and it just came out last month or 2 months ago, and I got messages from several people being like, oh, those are going in my pedagogy class like today. So that's, I mean, I think it's just it's a, from a field perspective, it couldn't be more different than a lot, especially a lot of STEM programs. And I won't speak for all of them, but at least like I know my wife didn't get any training at all in teaching, and she was a PhD in psychology. And Kristen, it sounds like biology was very similar. Now, in terms of what I do in terms of pedagogical research, I have two published papers. Well, one accepted, one published. I have another article under review at a Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy, and literally just got off the phone because we're a cohort of me and 3 other people just got a textbook contract through Norton, and so we're trying to so I have experience. Thank you. I have experience from a couple different avenues of how to do this, and also several different presentations. So that's been something I've been cultivating since I've been here, is thinking about how do I take this teaching heavy job and turn it and both improve on my teaching, but also kind of double dip and use it use that improvement as a way of getting some scholarship out. And I think this is where Kristen and I really kind of gel in our approaches, is that thinking about things in terms of thinking about the way that I approach scholarship is thinking about my teaching as sort of an experiment. I will take, my approach to dealing with scholarship of teaching is to say, okay, well, what are other people doing in other fields? So for instance, interleaving curricula is a big thing in my field right now, and something that I'm capitalizing on myself. That comes from, it has its origins in the study in mathematical education. But it turned into a broader educational thing. And I say, okay, well, what are these people doing? What do the studies show about interleaving versus blocked curricula? How can I apply that sort of that evidence to my own curricula, and then run that experiment a few times, and then show the results in an article.
Hey, Aaron, can you just tell us a little bit about the difference between those two?
Sure. So
you used words.
I do, I forget. So a blocked curriculum is what probably most of you are used to thinking about with curricular design. Think about, let's take history. So we're gonna learn about the Industrial Revolution on one day, then we're gonna learn about colonial America on the other day, then we're gonna learn about, I don't know, I'm just naming topics that have to do with history. Then we're gonna learn about Whitey Bulger on a third day. This is a terrible example. I'm backtracking. We're going to start something different. I'm going to do something more what I think, stuff that I do, so that I don't sound like a lunatic. So for me, for instance, I might teach, I have to teach several different topics in my classes. I have to teach composition. I have to teach rhythms. I have to teach harmony, and I have to teach form. Let's just take those 3: harmony, form, rhythm. A blocked curriculum would say, okay, we're going to spend 1/3 of the semester on harmony. We're going to spend 1/3 of the semester on rhythm. We're going to spend 1/3 of the semester on form, musical form. An interleaved curriculum, and that feels nice because you can get it. You can you see improvement in those areas, and then you take an exam, and then those students do well, and then they do the same thing, and they get better at each individual task. Well, what people started to notice was that, and you've probably all noticed the same thing, is that long-term retention of some of those topics is pretty minimal. So say even after a week, or after a winter break or something, they may come back and you're like, well, you were supposed to remember all the things that I did. And this is biology too. This is music theory too, instead of music theory 1. How come I have to redo all the stuff from music theory 1? Well, so what people started doing was saying, what if we taught what if we taught harmony, form, rhythm, harmony, form, rhythm. So ABC, 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 and interleave our concepts throughout the semester. What this does is it gives, on the one hand, it makes us feel a little less secure, because it means that we can't expect mastery from our students after we teach a topic. It means that students are going to be a little bit overwhelmed at first. But what studies have shown is that students who go through this sort of interleaved curriculum not only do just fine in the end, but they actually get better mastery, and most importantly, the long-term knowledge retention is significantly higher. And I've kind of noticed this myself. So what I tend to do in my own curriculum is there's a lot of stuff that I just teach. I have a huge block that's about a third of the class at the beginning of my 3-semester sequence. And I'll teach kind of everything. I tell my students, I'm like, you're going to learn everything you need to know. You're going to be overwhelmed in this third of the semester. It's going to be terrible. But then every single time, we're going to keep just coming back to each of those things every single week. And the rest of the semester will feel a lot easier for you, or the rest of the curriculum will feel a lot easier for you, because you're just constantly coming back to the same thing. And so that's been a thing that I've been thinking a lot about, is like how to structure my curriculum this way. And these thoughts came by reading scholarship from other disciplines. In particular, I'll say, like, James Lang has a book called Small Teaching that love that book, and honest to God think that I've used that book as an intro sentence for all 3 of my articles. So that's been it. So that would be my, like, that sort of evidence-based practice is sort of a thing that is a continuity thread amongst all of my work. And I didn't mean to go into that long of a thread, but I think that's my big intro.
That was my fault. I pushed you into those terms when you laid them out there. So my Whitey Bulger class is way better since I started interleaving it.
Right? No, this is, but like, these are, but I think these are things that all of us do. A lot of us will, and especially at a place like Missouri Western, a lot of us really care about our teaching, and we'll probably be reading books like James Lang's book, or like any other, like, science of learning book. And I think if you can just it only takes a small tweak to say, like, how do I apply this? Has this been done in my field before? And then you could easily write an article on it.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed Lang's book. I put the Amazon link in our chat if anybody is interested in that. So sorry to derail.
No. You're absolutely great. I'd also put, I don't know if anyone else knows it, but How Learning Works by Ambrose is another, like, those are my 2, like, go-to research wells.
I'll grab that for you.
I just I published an article recently about, or will be published in January, I guess, about essentially how to. My friend and I got this idea from reading this book, and we said, where Ambrose was saying, connecting your class to other disciplines, making connections between your class and prior knowledge, basically helps with knowledge retention a whole lot. And so we crafted a post-tonal theory curriculum, basically how does music work, that was written in the 20th century class, entirely based around Alex Ross's The Rest is Noise, so that it's a historically focused music theory class. The idea being that students come in with some knowledge of history, even if it's not, like, great, it does, as long as they have some experience with it, that those sorts of connections make a big difference. And literally the entire paper was just, we got inspiration from this. We wanted to create a class based on this. Here's how it works, and we published it. And it's peer reviewed. It counts just as much as anything else. But that's sort of where we came from with that. That actually kind of, if we want to go into our next section, Kristen and I basically wanted this to be less about us talking, as much as I really enjoy chatting about my own and, you know, like humble bragging about myself. We kind of thought it would be better to maybe structure the next little bit around several topics where you guys could ask, where we could make this more of like a fireside chat, as sort of like come ask questions. We had 3 topics in mind, and if we stray from that, that's okay too. We're okay. But we thought 3 things might be interesting: how to gain inspiration for projects, and that's sort of what I was already kind of getting at with my own work. Where to go to find this literature, because this can be, I think this can actually be pretty challenging if you're not like I've had to read these articles for a long time, but I could imagine if I have to go, for instance, into the terrible world of music education instead of music theory education, it's like a land of terrible things where there's too many articles. It's confusing and I don't like it. And so maybe we can talk about that. And also talking about collaboration. Like I would say, as of today, I've, at least for myself, I'm collaborating on almost all my projects, almost all of them. I've got about 5 or 6 different projects going right now, and I think all but one of them are collaborative. And so I thought maybe if there are questions, we could start there. If not, I'll just start talking, or Kristen can start talking, and we can make it work. Trust me.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do you, do you guys, when you're doing collaborative projects and you go to publish, do you have a difficult time finding an appropriate venue to publish? Because I have, you know, a few classes I've taught that aren't chemistry, but you know, like the honors colloquia, but I really have no idea where to take these ideas, like the finding the science in science fiction, or the overlap of Westerns and science fiction stuff that I've done. So how do you approach that?
Do you want to go, because you have more experience with this sort of thing than I do, I think.
Well, I don't know that I do, because I'm probably still, I think everything that I have done has been sort of kind of close enough to being within the realm of biology or health education, that I'm still able to find appropriate venues. But I think for those specific ones, I would probably start with there's 2 databases, and we have this down as some things to mention of where to go to look for literature, but there's a database called ERIC, ERIC, for the Education Resource Information Center.
Right.
They index a lot of stuff, and some of it's not peer reviewed, so you have to be a little careful with it if that's your goal. But I would search there for papers like that, you know, or Google Scholar maybe. I would probably start out by spending a day going through the rabbit hole of Google Scholar and maybe ERIC, or even PubMed. If there's science in it, you might find some stuff in PubMed, which for those not in the sciences, that's the National Library of Medicine housed database for biomedical research. And it does include a lot of education related journals, and health education related journals more specifically. So I think I would start with searching for, pulling some keywords out of the descriptions you just gave, and see if I can find if anybody else has published something like that, and start from there. I had one that I had done a poster on, just because, you know, we need a poster in order to present something. I've been having students in one of my classes read a book for a long time, and I just sort of wrote a poster about how I approached using that book in this very molecular oriented class, but I was also having them read a book about kind of medical ethics related, the Henrietta Lacks book. And as it happened, a journal that I do read had a special section on teaching ethics. They were going to have a special issue on teaching ethics in biology and microbiology. So although I wouldn't normally have submitted to that journal, they did a special themed issue that made it fit, and that kind of worked out too. So I guess that's a long answer, but looking for other articles that might be kind of like that is probably where I would start. I don't know, what do you think, Aaron?
I have a couple thoughts on this. One is that so for myself, I've also there are clear places to publish music theory pedagogy research. Like there are, and if I wanted to broaden more, there are clear places to publish in music, like Music Educator Journal, like literally. But in my own, I will say that in thinking about some of these projects, what I think is an important kind of caveat is you might reach out to people who are doing similar projects, or B are also in like that sort of field, and ask them about particularly impact factor of these journals, because it's really hard to judge like what's the difference between Journal of Mathematics and Music and Journal of Music and Mathematics. Like I don't know, but actually, like, for instance, I'll actually give you a good example. Journal of Music Theory is one of 3 top impact journals in my field. Journal of Music Theory and Analysis, sounds very similar, is a 2nd-tier journal. But like, there's nowhere to go to like ask people that. And the only way that I knew that is because I just asked a whole bunch of people, just being like, what do you think of this journal? What do you think of this journal? What do you think of this journal? It might be easier in the sciences because you guys keep track of impact factors a little bit better than we do, because our impact factor is like 1.
Yeah, it depends though, because in this, and I'm sorry, I just totally jumped in and cut you off, but not everything it's actually not that easy to find impact factors, because we don't subscribe to the service. Missouri Western doesn't subscribe to the ISI service that lists those, and not every journal is going to be listed anyway. Some of the education ones have really low impact factors relative, like the Physiology Teaching Journal has a way lower impact factor than the bench science physiology journals from the same society, just because there's, I guess, less readership in that specialty. So I don't know that you kind of still have to do the word of mouth thing.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about the word of mouth thing. And I know that's like sort of a cop-out answer, but it really is like, honestly, there's 2 things that have come out of that for me when it comes to those kinds of questions. I've honestly gotten like collaboration ideas from people just from talking to them about it. But 2, it just really is it has been the only way that I've been able to find things. And like, people ask me this now because they know I went on a tirade asking everyone for a couple of weeks about journal tiers, and everyone's gonna have different opinions, and so it's just sort of like a heuristic. But I will also say that in terms of finding those journals, another way to deal with this, or another thing, is word of mouth can also help you find places that you might not have known about too. I'll call this word of mouth. This post-journal theory article, we submitted it, and the original framing of the article was not so much about the interdisciplinary stuff, or it was about like connecting to other fields, but we didn't really like deal with any interdisciplinary like pedagogy in any way. And one of our reviewers literally sent us like a sheet of, here's a bunch of SoTL stuff that you can like go research. Here are some like general teaching resources. It's actually how I found the Ambrose book. Here are some stuff for interdisciplinary research. And then, we were talking about expanding this project at one point, and the way I would go about doing that, if we did go that route, is to potentially just use some of those journals that are cited in the articles that I've been reading. I'm actually trying to pull up. You're gonna total trigger me, because gosh darn, Reviewer 2 was the worst. But if I'll pull some of these resources. No, seriously, Reviewer 2 was like, this could never work. This could only work in one school ever, at Colorado College, where they teach one class the entire semester. I'm like, you misread the article. You're a butthead. So anyway.
Is that what you've given your response to reviewers?
Oh, and then that reviewer didn't even review the revision. Anyway, nothing like turning the other cheek. when you're like, oh, thank you for this nice feedback. But that would be my, like, honestly, word of mouth is really the best thing I can tell you, is word of mouth, and diving through bibliographies and just kind of like getting a sense of that. Let's see, there it is. Why do I have to grant access to?
Can I ask a question about collaboration while we're still on it?
You can, please do. I'm just trying to figure out how Dropbox works.
So how do you collaborate on teaching philosophy and writing about teaching philosophy or teaching approaches when you and your collaborators don't agree? Or has life been simple for you guys?
Life's been simple for me.
I don't collaborate with those people on that paper.
Nice.
I will say that there are times when I disagree with people. So for instance, like in the original version of this article, I made a big stink about about being like, this. I wanted to have like full paragraphs about the fact that this could allow us to talk about like sexuality. This could allow us to talk to bring in more examples by women. I wanted to talk about diversity and inclusion, and my collaborator did not give any. Honestly, was like, didn't care about it, and verged on, was a little bit not into it at all. Was thinking that some of the things that I was talking about were like tokenizing people. She hasn't changed her tune and come to my side because I'm right. But
so you're saying the best way to deal with folks that you disagree with is get them to agree with you?
Time and persistence.
But
no,
pedagogy.
But I will say that we were able, like, I think it's important to collaborate with people that you are willing to have those tough conversations with. And we were basically able to be like, okay, I believe in this, but I'm not like, I don't believe in it strongly enough for me to like put it in the article. And she could be like, okay, well, I'm willing to go on your thing. I'm willing to put it in a footnote, but it can't go into a paragraph, into a main paragraph. And so like it's just negotiating. But I think it's super important to make sure that you're able to negotiate and able to have real conversations. Cause like, I don't know about you guys, but when I collaborate with people, like I'm a little bit more OCD than a lot of people. And I'm in more ways than one. Like I like to set strict deadlines. I also tend to mull on the editing process a lot more than some other people. So I did a presentation, proposal with a friend of mine, and we're really good friends. But it turns out that she doesn't like to edit as much as I do. She was ready to send it off like literally 3 weeks before I was willing to send it off. And I wanted to edit and tinker, and we probably won't collaborate again after that. Because we found that we just didn't have a good, like, we were able to have these tough conversations, but our working relationship wasn't, just didn't jive.
Yeah, I was being flippant when I said I don't collaborate with those people if I don't have agreement with them. But I think the same. I think it's like a collaboration on a paper or a project is just like any other partnership. If it's not working, it's probably, I don't know if it's worth repeating. At least you might need to finish the one project to completion, but I would choose to pursue other collaborators in the future if at all possible. But I also am a conflict avoider, so.
I also think it's important, if you're going to collaborate, if you're the one being the jerk face, like admit that you're being a jerk face. So like I have shafted. I have a project with Ramon Simchi, and like I've shafted him a couple times because I've gotten like way overly busy, and the project had to like take a little bit less. It had to take a backseat to some other things, and like I think it's important that he and I had a good conversation about that, to be like, hey, this is my fault. Like let's talk about realistic strategies instead of just being like bottling it up. And we're still collaborating, and we're still very good friends, and so that's important.
I think that may be a good segue into choosing collaborators.
Mhm.
And some of the best collaborations I've been on aren't maybe even necessarily the people that I agree with the most initially, but if you recognize a colleague who has a similar interest, but also fills in some gaps that you don't. Those have been some of the most rewarding. So I think it's kind of well known around my department that I'm a ruler lady. So I don't know if you guys refer to that in your graduate programs, but this used to be the people who would actually measure the margins on your dissertation with a ruler and make you redo it if they weren't right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm one of them. And so I'm valued, I think, for my editing capability. We'll put it that way. But yeah, how do you choose your collaborator then, or how do you thought about that?
You can start if you want.
Well, I think most recently it's been the people that who teach classes that are most closely aligned with sort of topics that I teach, or who are doing similar things. Michael, Jason, I'm pointing because they're on either side of my office walls here. Michael, Jason, and I just came up with something, a survey project we decided to do this fall because we were in the hallway talking about some stuff and thought, why don't we ask our students this? And so that's kind of spontaneous. I have thought about, and I have failed at seeking out collaborators for this. I have a project that involves some survey data that to submit it to the journal I would most like to submit it to, I would really need to do some analysis that I don't know how to do. And I have thought I really need to reach out to someone in psychology or someone who is more accustomed to these kinds of statistical analyses, because when I read that journal and see that type of stuff published, I see the analyses they do. And like I said, they're not a Novus or t-test. That's what I do. And so I know I just haven't taken the step of doing it, but I would look for complementary expertise. Like you said, if you're the editing person, then that's something that people know. I need to find someone that can do those kinds of statistics and has time and an interest in helping. And it's not something I'm especially good at. Probably my only other collaboration outside of Missouri Western was because that was a friend and colleague from my postdoc, and we worked together on something because we had taught a class together as postdocs. We had co-taught a class, and then we just kept that project going for a couple of years after we moved on to other things. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, because the short answer is I'm mostly best at finding collaborators that I'm talking to frequently anyway, and I'm not that good at finding collaborators outside of that. I need to be better.
Well, I think it's worth kind of saying, like, I would say that I'm the same way. Like, I have, well, that's not true. So like my articles my collaborative articles that I've done, those have all been just like good friends where we have conversations and we're like, hey, like that'd be a good idea. But I've also like suggested that to enough friends that like I'm not saying every single time this happens that someone's like, yeah, let's do it. Like probably I have like a 1 in 3 shot, or 1 in 3 like shot of it really being an actual project when I suggest these things. And sometimes I'm happy about that because some friends don't have that collaborative expert or that complementary expertise. I really like working with people who don't think like me. I really, really think that's important. And so like I have a really good friend who is the music theory professor at UMKC, and he and I we're starting a big project together, and we just got done with an article. And I like that I don't have to worry about being like, yo, you're being an a-hole, stop it. Like and we can say that to each other, and that's good. But he also approaches music in a dramatically different way than me. Like I make fun of him for the way he does it, and he makes fun of the way that I do it. But at the end of the day, we actually because we came at it from 2 different perspectives, the project from 2 different perspectives, our one project has now turned into our initial article turned into 2 articles, and then that 2 articles we figured out how to turn into a book like a couple of years down the road. And that's just because I'm like, hey, I could do this part and you could do this part, and like and then we can merge at one point, and that'd be really fun. And what an interesting time, what an interesting set of questions that I couldn't ask on my own. And so that's not really like an I guess it is an analytical technique. He just has he uses different theories than I do. And honestly, I think it's a way better project because of it. I really like working in collaborations because I feel like I can do more than than I could do on my own. But I would also say it's really important to have an upfront conversation about working methods when you choose. Really important.
Yeah, it might also be important to talk about authorship too, because that's probably something we all experience through graduate school and beyond. But I also know that, just as an aside, the conventions for authorship in different disciplines are very different. In my discipline, the last author is the one you pay attention to. That's the person who got the grant funding and had the big idea. Yeah, I know Erin's like, what? So it's completely opposite to what, this is something that's important, like for P&T committees on campus to pay attention to, that there's no one size fits all for order of authorship. We would have last author and first author. First author is usually the grad student or the postdoc who did most of the work, and the senior author had the big idea and all that.
Oh,
and that's
yeah,
opposite. But anyway, especially if you're collaborating across disciplines, if authorship matters a lot to you, those are things you got to hash out before you're submitting the paper.
Yeah, and I'll say that that's particularly a little bit harder when you're dealing with people you don't know as well. Like this textbook project that that we're working on, this started this summer, and it started because a friend of mine and I we wanted to do something together, and I said we should do a textbook, and then she said I have a friend who would do this with you, and then we asked this guy named Phil Ewell, who is way more famous than any of us, and she had the gall to go email him, and just out of the blue, and he was like, yeah, sure, I'll be willing to like have this conversation with you. But like that created an odd dynamic where especially the three of us know each other very well, and we don't know Phil very well, but Phil's also like probably the most famous music theorist at the moment. And when it comes to authorship, though, it's like, does that mean he gets, like, it wasn't his idea, but does that mean he gets first author? And we're probably like, we said like after saying yes, the very next thing that we said was what are we going to split things? Like, what's the work going to be split with? How are the royalties going to be split? Because it's important to have those conversations up front, and it's awkward and it's weird, but I'll tell you, like, it's made working with people I don't know a hell of a lot better, a heck of a lot better.
Too late.
You didn't hit pause.
But I'll also say that but you can also kind of think about it in terms of what you like. There might be reasons to put, like, I haven't said this to the group yet, but I think we're going to probably put his name first, just because it'll sell more copies. Despite the fact that in all of my other collaborations, I've just done alphabetical order.
Well, I'd like to take a step away from collaboration and open the floor up if anybody has questions that they would like to ask our presenters today. Okay.
I have one more if no one else does.
Lori's chiming in.
I'll ask a question.
Oh, good.
Can you talk a little bit about your process for coming up with ideas?
I can start there. There are two ways that there are kind of two paths that I've taken, and one is more honest than the other. But I can help you be less honest in making it more publishable. They both are interrelated. So sometimes as I mentioned before, sometimes it's just a matter of like, I literally am sitting there going, okay, what do I need to do to find a project? Like, what do I need to do? And I might just go read a general textbook and literally just be like, that sounds interesting. Maybe could I do something with that with my curriculum? Could I do something like that in a classroom? Because that's an instant kind of like, research has shown that this helps students do blank, but this has not been applied to music theory. Instant project. And but if I'm honest with myself, that has happened to me. But a lot of the time, with several of my projects, it's been more like, I really think this is a good idea I'll try something in my classroom. So for instance, I'm publishing an article on the use of public music theory in the classroom. So like having students write program notes or make YouTube videos or podcasts that like analyze a piece of music aimed at the general public. That was just like an idea I had. I was like, that sounds really cool. I really like this thought. And then I backtracked and said, why does this work? And went into and from there kind of went into the actual like psychology of learning and about making connections to the outside world, about making community engaged, about making things more about real life situations. But that backtracking actually was really important because I did get an article out of it that sort of, and that's what I mean about a little bit less, I feel like a little gross about it because in the article it makes me sound a lot more circumspect than I am. But the next article that came out, or that's coming out from this project, I started what came from that sort of backtracking because I was like, oh, a thing that I hadn't considered that is also just as important for people, that has been shown to be just as like helpful for students, is community engaged learning. And it's just a small tweak to my project that I can bring to my classroom. And now it's a community engaged learning project. And that became a whole nother research area for me, was how to use community engaged learning in the music theory classroom. So it's just sort of like, sometimes it's scrounging, sometimes it's deliberate looking, sometimes it's scrounging and backtracking, and then sometimes it's just bibliography scourges that sort of give me that idea. I'd like to hear what Kristen has to say, though.
Well, I will say a lot of the ideas that I've had have come from going to conferences. There are, in my discipline, there are a couple of ways that I can present or listen to stuff that's related to education within my field. And one is my major professional society has a teaching section. And so at the national conference, there's what I always call the bench research, the people working with cells and mice and molecules and whatever. And then there's the teaching section. And so that's a place to click with people who are doing education research in the same kinds of classes that I teach. And I've gotten a lot of ideas from listening to talks and going to posters there. Oh, maybe this spin-off of that would work in my class, or at least I'd like to try it. If I'm going to try it, I should be forward thinking about it so that I could turn it into a project also. I've been a lot less good about papers than posters. A lot of my things I do in class have been posters, but not made it into papers yet. So one is the education section within my major discipline conference. And then there are also smaller societies that are more education research focused. And that's been an even better place to get ideas when I go to those conferences. A lot of times I just hear something that sounds cool. And what I have tried to do, and I would say especially lately, the last couple of years, I've gotten busier with more other things I haven't been as good about, is being deliberate, the word that Erin used. Sort of, if you're going to try something new, think about how you would publish that. How would you assess it? If assessment is something you need for the journal you want to publish in, do you have a survey you can give? Do you have grade distribute, some sort of evidence as to whether it worked or not, a basis for it. And I'm like you, Erin, I don't always necessarily do I don't sit there and comb the literature and then come up with a hypothesis and then think of a class activity. It's often more, this sounds like a cool thing to do. Oh, is that a good idea? Have other people done it? How can I tweak it? I do it backwards a lot too for this. So I think conferences have been a real boon for me with getting ideas, and then and trying to just be mindful of anything I try in class. Could it turn out to be something that could be presented somewhere? I try to keep track of things like that, and I'm not so good at it anymore.
I'll just kind of chime on for 2 seconds, which is that also, yes, conferences. I should have said that the public music theory thing came from, I saw someone gave a presentation on his own public music theory, and I went, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'd also kind of say that sort of that's what Kristen's talking about how would I assess that, because that is an important thing for papers or journal articles. It's not like, I really don't like pedagogy articles that are just like, we did a thing, like, look at us, we like went on a ladder today and look at my students got higher. Like, you have to show why is this better, which is why I tend to kind of couch things in the science of learning. Like, that seems to be an easy way to get to show efficacy. But there are two things that are really important here, which is that first, that can be really helpful for you from a teaching perspective, from a improving your teaching perspective. If you think about every class activity as what would it take to get this published, and then go through that process, like, that actually is a really good reflection habit that I think has improved my own teaching a whole lot. Second, though, is that it's important to realize that a lot of these projects take longer than an article. Like, I wrote an article this summer. It probably, from start to finish, it took me 2 months start of idea of project to submitting to journal. And like, but like, you can't do that with a pedagogy article, because you have to test it first. And I think that's just a really, like, if you're envisioning these projects, think about that.
So we have time for one more question. And it comes from Evan Banks, and I'm actually going to start answering it because as a bridge here. Evan asks in our chat box here, do you think that there is a shortage of scholarship coming from people outside of higher education? Our pushes for content regarding primary education, what is access to journals like for these folks? And so I want to start to build a bridge, because Kristen, you brought up conferences. And one of the things that I do when I go to a conference, and especially one that's broader, is I tend to go to high school pedagogy panels for two reasons. One is to see what's going on in the high schools, because we are the next step. We are here at Missouri Western grade 13 for a lot of folks. But secondly, to get ideas to say, oh, that's really sharp. They're always thinking about teaching because they are trained in a very different way than we are. And how can I adapt that to a college classroom and build upon that? So if you could speak to that, Evan has chimed in. Sparkles is behind him now. So we can, you can address them quickly. So talk to me about that, the bridge between higher education and primary education.
I have a feeling that the bridge is better in some disciplines than others. I will say that K through 12, so in K through 5, they don't teach science, you know, it's the fourth grade teacher is teaching everything, right? Yeah, I'm seeing Shauna mention the NSTA. Yeah, so the National Science Teachers Association has journals that are specific, as Shauna said, for different grade levels. I am not aware of another journal specifically geared for K through 12 or even high school biology or more broad science teachers. There certainly may well be one, but that bridge is, it's like a tiny little one of those science fiction movie bridges where if you step on it, it starts to crumble. It's not a good connection. And I think some of that is that the training for K through 12 teachers is not the same as the training for higher ed. So they often don't have the training in research methodology. So it's just a lot less common. They're also not rewarded for it. They're spending a lot of time doing it and not getting the rewards for publishing it. So I think it's a place where there's a lot of improvement to be done. Access to journals is probably lousy. In fact, community colleges, a lot of community college science faculty are in a similar position to primary education, that they're not rewarded for it, they're not expected to do it, and they have not a lot of funding to go to conferences or access to journal articles. And I know we're getting close to time, so let me send the floor over to Aaron.
I don't really have much to add other than that. We've been making a big push towards, at least we, meaning music theorists, have been making a big push towards trying to be more inclusive towards high school teachers, but we run into all the same problems that you just mentioned. I'd also say, and which is despite the fact that, like, honestly, when I think about my own teaching and I look at any, like, literally any person with an ed degree, I'm just like, wow, I feel really inferior. But two, I do think that, yeah, I can't think of any real articles that I've ever read about, like, how to teach this in high school. I have seen some articles about AP theory, but I don't know. But if you were to go that route, what I would assume you'd want to do is be looking towards more education in general specific journals, like K through, because that would be. Yeah, I've seen like music classes, and like the Music Educators Journal, for instance, is specifically designed for, like, they're talking about K through 12 education.
Now, what I see in my discipline journals, the ones that I read the most, is outreach to K-12, not the work done by K through 12 teachers.
Right. Yeah. The same.
If I may follow up on the question, do you guys feel like that means that your variable pool is much smaller, that you're dealing with primarily, mature brains, and that when we're looking, well, I mean,
theoretically,
thank you. That when we're talking about development and pedagogy and how to teach students in general, if we're missing, between the ages of 6 and 17, we must not know very much, right? And if what we do know is about really how to teach post-secondary, right? What would you imagine the best way to build that bridge would be?
I would say that it depends. Like, no one teaches music theory in high schools, really. Like, it's not a common thing, and so I think a lot of times part of the reason is that academia is super niche, and so I think approaching the study of learning, like any of our disciplines from the study, would, as a broad thing, is probably the wrong method. I would probably think about it more like, how do I teach blank age group, blank population, because, like, even to the point where, like, I have people who write articles about, like, here's how to teach music theory in a liberal arts college just in the music theory core, which is like super small subset of people. But I think that's the right move because people are different. I think there is a lot of place to have that sort of, like, intersection. It's sort of what I was talking about before, in that if you want to go that route, going into like an education journal and looking at how people learn in blank age group, and then saying, hey, I've noticed other people are doing this research in a college age, and then combining that, like, that's a really good, like, that's, to me, that's good research practice, is taking already proven, already peer-reviewed research and applying it in a different way.
Yeah, I even see in my area, I see journal articles published on teaching medical students, and can we then take the medical student, the research in that group, and take it a few years earlier to the undergraduate level? So I agree. I do think that the K through 12 literature is probably more general and less discipline specific than what it tends to be in academia. So I would agree with Aaron to start there.
I think this is a wonderful time to stop. We're at 2:01 now. I'd like everybody to give a round of applause to Kristen and Aaron for sharing their experiences and their research with us today.
Thank
Just
you.
to-
Or I was going to say applause on mute is pretty funny, actually.
Yes, I love it on mute. So just a couple of announcements here. Our next workshop is going to be 2 weeks from today with Jordan Atkinson from Communication, and that is going to be on, I'm checking my phone right now, hold on. A workshop on building relationships with students through effective classroom communication behaviors. So join us in 2 weeks. I will send out announcements. Regarding this talk, I will be posting this, and I will post many of the sources that are in the chat. I'll post that in our show notes on our YouTube channel. And just as a reminder, if you are interested in more on your colleagues' work, we do have the virtual scholarship summit, which is available on the CTL's website, where there is about 15 presentations now. So please check out your colleagues' good work. We've also opened up something new called Griff Vids. If you have a pedagogical or professional development tip you'd like to share with your colleagues, please reach out to me. We're looking for short videos, less than 5 minutes, that you can reach out to your colleagues with. So far, we have a series of videos, but we want to keep adding to it. So if something's fresh on your head, and you want to share it with us, please do so. So I'd like to draw this workshop to a close, and thank you again, Kristen and Aaron, for presenting today.
Thanks
for
for
the
having me.
invitation.
Thank you.